Welcome back to Dead Inside and Board Certified, the podcast where we're clinically trained to help others, but barely hold it together ourselves. Let's get into it. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not provide medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice and is not a substitute for your professional care. Any patient stories discussed are fictionalized, composite, and anonymized to protect their privacy. The views expressed are our own and do not represent employers, organizations, or licensing boards. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact local emergency services or the crisis hotline. With that out of the way, welcome to Dead Inside and Board Certified.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Dead Inside and Board Certified. We are going to continue talking about suicide. We're going to be talking about grief, and we're going to focus more this week on prevention. So if this is a topic that is sensitive for you, if you are feeling some way when you hear that word suicide, please pause. Reach out to someone. If you feel like you don't have friends or family that you can reach out to, please use your emergency local services. Call or text 988, reach out to your community resources, or reach out to someone that you trust. But keep in mind, we are going to be talking about some pretty hard topics today. I think it's important to continue talking about suicide prevention because it is May, it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I have a very, very special guest that's going to be joining us today to share her story that can hopefully impact so many of you. I want to preface this by saying this episode is not about blame. This episode is not about something you've done wrong or something you've missed. People can literally do everything right when it comes to suicide prevention and can still lose someone to suicide. So the goal of this episode is conversation, it's awareness, it's building connection, because suicide is so complex. And if we can help one person raise awareness and prevent the loss of a life, that is enough for me. But please keep in mind, you are not to blame if someone around you has lost their life to suicide, and you're not to blame if you're having those feelings. I want to share a letter from our special guest today that was sent to me after speaking at a trauma conference. So I work in the ER outside of psychiatry, and one thing that was asked of me was to speak at this trauma conference because there is a huge need in the ER community, paramedics, firefighters, police, you name it. Healthcare, it's an area that has very, very poor mental health. And there's not enough resources and there's not enough focus because there is such a garbage stigma that we are the ones that are supposed to stay strong. We are the ones that are supposed to help others. So why would we pause and need any kind of help for ourselves? And so let me share this letter and then I will bring on our special guest. Hi, Morgan. I wanted to reach out and tell you how much I appreciated your presentation yesterday at the trauma conference. I think it's admiring how passionate you are about mental health in our line of work and the many departments that work alongside us. I wanted to share a bit of why your presentation touched me and why I feel that there's a bigger need for mental health and suicide awareness within the healthcare system. I've been in healthcare for 24 years, and my ex-husband, the father of my children, has been in EMS and fire for well over 20 years. My ex-husband had to give up working on the ambulance 2 years ago when he went out with a hip injury. It was devastating for him. He's only ever known helping others, and it was a huge blow to his ego. He suffered tremendously from depression, anxiety, and most of all, PTSD from everything that he encountered over the years. It wasn't as noticeable when we were married because he had an outlet and we would share stories or he could easily vent about the calls to me. The last 2 years really took a toll on his mental health and he struggled. He tried to reach out, but like you said, there was this stigma of being weak and people talked about him or said things he didn't like to hear. His friends and old coworkers really failed him, and in many ways, so did I. And this is a guilt I will carry for a very long time. Even though we were divorced, we remained friends and got along very well. I never truly saw the signs or the struggles. He suffered in silence, and I didn't think it was as bad as it was until it was too late. These last 2 years, he suffered in pain from his hip injury and was barely able to walk at times, but he still managed to go to work driving a semi-truck to make money, to pay his bills, and show his children he was still trying. When in reality, he was struggling behind those closed doors. Our children were his world, and he never wanted to fail them or make them not proud. I think he held on as long as he could, but this last April, a year ago, he could not hold on any longer, and he took his own life by driving out to a park and shooting himself. Though he wanted to die there, it didn't work out that way, and bystanders called 911. He was transported to the hospital by people he once worked side by side with. Then, when he got to the ER, he was treated by people he used to bring patients to and who knew me very well. I was still his emergency contact, and when I got the phone call to get to the hospital, I was devastated. I kept thinking, how is this possible? They have to be lying. He would never leave his children. I know it's only been a year, but I realize when someone is that far gone with their mental health, they do not think straight, and it wasn't him who made that decision to leave. It was all the darkness and hopelessness he was feeling, and overwhelmed feelings that he could not escape. I wish he would have reached out for help. I wish there wasn't such a stigma with men or in emergency medicine that you can't show weakness by asking for help. I wish there would have been more resources available to him. My goal is to advocate for people like him and for the ones who are too afraid to ask for help. The people that came out to memorialize and honor him was astonishing. I wish he knew all the people that truly cared about him. I'm sure it's hard to see these things when you only see the bad in life. My children and I have set up a memorial account to give a scholarship every year in his honor to someone who wants to go into EMS or fire. The kids and I also followed through with his wishes through Gift of Hope, and he was able to be a tissue donor. I would love to be more involved with advocating for mental health and suicide awareness, and so would my children. I'm very thankful that I was able to listen to your presentation and see what the team is doing in our area. Thank you for all that you do. Well, first of all, thank you for what you do. Thank you for sharing this letter. Thank you for reaching out. This is going to help so many people. And if we can reach one person in EMS or fire, and I know there's a lot of people listening. I know there's people that listen who work in EMS, fire, paramedics, police. I think this letter and the fact that we're going to have this guest on today is going to help somebody. It's going to make them feel like they are not weak for needing help, but it's also going to show them life after suicide. So, unfortunately, her husband or her ex husband is no longer here. We're not able to show him this after the fact. But what we can do is use his death for good. It's great that he was able to donate to Gift of Hope. He was able to save lives in that way. But his loss is going to be able to save the lives of other EMS, fire, nursing individuals who feel so overwhelmed with what they're doing. Well, first of all, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate that you wanted to talk about this more in depth too. If you want to start by talking about yourself and then what made you want to share your story today?
Sure. So actually I've been in healthcare now 25 years now that I really think about it. That's really odd to say. Um, been a
Wow.
nurse. Yeah, been a nurse 15 of those years, with majority in
Wow.
emergency medicine. I currently work as a nursing supervisor over two of the convenient cares in the Champaign-Urbana area. Um, pretty much have just been around ER, EMS, fire, probably majority of my life at this point. My children know nothing any different either. They've always known mom, dad working in healthcare. My current husband
Mm,
now, he also works the fire department. So they get it every aspect of their lives. I have a daughter who's
mhm.
graduating from the LPN program tomorrow. I have a son who also works in healthcare. So, I mean, it's full circle at this point. Mhm.
That is your life. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you feel like in your journey in emergency medicine, do you feel like you've ever had a point in time where it really started getting difficult with everything that you see? Or do you feel like as a woman, maybe it was easier for you to reach out for help?
Um, I would say my team and the people I worked with, they were more of a family, instead of just coworkers. So anytime that we would have a bad shift or things got too debilitating, we would really lean on each other. We would either, because I worked night shift, so we would always, after shift in the morning, we would go eat breakfast or we would go to the gym
Mhm.
together. Really, that was the main support. But like I said, so my ex husband, he was EMS who would bring patients to the hospital that I worked with. So we both had an outlet there. Um, and then really, I would say that when it got really, really bad was probably the start of COVID, and just
Yeah.
the emotional toll it took on us as nursing to watch our patients be in a position where we were their only support, and sometimes we didn't have the resources they needed. And like it really broke my heart knowing that we were their family because they really couldn't have anybody from the outside, depending which facility you were in. Some places didn't allow visitors, and it was
Mhm.
face to face screen time was all they really had at their end of life. And about the
Yeah.
end of COVID, that's when I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think I could stay in the ER. I needed to have a change. It really took a toll on me. Also, I feel like my effect with my children, it was just completely different. And then also being on night shift for over 20 years, that really took a toll on me too. So as soon as I got off night
Yeah.
shift and took this new role, even my kids within like 2 weeks, they're like, Mom, you smile all the time. You're a totally different person.
Yes. Night shift will just tear you down in general. But yeah, we saw a huge spike in the need for mental health during and after COVID. I mean, that's when, if you think about it, all of these telehealth psychiatry businesses were just sprouting because there were so many patients and not enough people to take care of them. And I really feel like I started noticing even healthcare workers during COVID. That's when they were finally stepping up and being like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yep.
Or they were comfortable, reaching out for help. Do you
Yeah.
feel like your coworkers had a similar experience? Do you feel like your ex-husband struggled during that time as well?
I really don't think he struggled at that point. I think
Mhm.
that was when he actually got an injury and had hurt his hip. So that took a toll on
Mhm.
him physically. But he still went to work no matter how much pain he was in. He tried doing it for about another year and a half, and it just got to the point where
Mhm.
he ended up having to walk with a cane. So of course you can't push a cot and a cane at the same time. So he did talk to
Yeah.
our children and his parents because he didn't want to make that decision by himself. He wanted to make sure he had the support of his daughters and his mom and dad. Because he really just felt like he was disappointing everybody, but everyone 100% was like, "No, Dad, we know you can't do this anymore. We completely understand." So that's when he decided to step away from EMS side of it, and he still worked full time as a truck driver, which getting up and down in that truck, I still don't know how he did it.
And it sounds like similar to your experience when you work in EMS or the emergency room, like that kind of becomes your identity. That's who you are, that's what you know.
Mhm.
You thrive in that environment. Do you feel like him having such a huge life change kind of heightened his depression, like he lost a sense of who he was, or had he struggled with that in the past?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like as soon as he left that whole world, it really took a toll on him emotionally and probably pushed his depression into overtime because working in healthcare, especially EMS fire side of things, they have a dark humor. And his partner, they were more than just partners. They were like best friends. They went fishing on their days off. They hung out together, had bonfires together. So I think
Mhm.
once he stopped seeing these people every third day and he stayed
Mhm.
home if he wasn't farming, he really became isolated. And there was that stigma because I do recall him reaching out at one point, and at first people were like, "Oh, it's okay, just get some help." It was almost like they downplayed how he was feeling or
Mhm.
his thoughts. And so at that point he was just like, they don't care. They're not going to listen, or they're going to make fun of me, because it did come back around that he had heard that they were talking about him making comments about being depressed and not wanting to live anymore. So instead of
Yes.
reaching out in the fact of maybe this is him asking for help, it was almost like they were making fun of him. And at that point, he's like, nope, never again am I going to say anything to them.
And I think it's so easy to tell a patient or, a family member or anyone, just get some help.
Yeah.
Patients or people that have never experienced that before don't know what help looks like, especially when they don't even really know what's going on themselves. Like maybe, do you feel like he was able to identify this is depression? Or is he, you know, you had mentioned in your letter, like at that point you felt like he was just kind of too far gone when your mind is racing that much. Do you think they're able to identify what help they need?
So a little bit more of that background. He actually kept a note on his phone and had actually made entries in it, I would say going all the way back 3 years, if not maybe four, um, from the day that he ended up taking his life. So when me and the kids read that, we had seen over time where it just progressed. Like he understood, he knew that he had PTSD. He was having the nightmares about specific calls that he had been on, patients he had lost, pediatric codes. Like he really recalled all of them in very detail. And so he knew he was having issues. He knew he had problems, and he had even made comments of he knew he needed help, but who was he gonna go to help? Who was he gonna ask? Because in his mind, he was like, anyone I go talk to is gonna be like this new graduate, or they're not gonna understand the thoughts and feelings he's having from working the streets all these years. And so deep down,
Yeah.
he did know that he was suffering, but I think he was so far gone that he didn't know how or who to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially during that time, I mean, going through something where you lose who you are, he had a lot going on. And when you recognize, like, I need help and you don't know what that looks like, I hear patients, they just feel even more like a burden and helpless, even though those resources are out there and they may not know what that looks like. What do you wish people knew about your ex-husband other than the fact that he did take his own life?
All he ever wanted to do was help people. 100%. His love was fire, EMS. He loved being a paramedic. He loved being able to make a difference in somebody else's life. He was a great preceptor, instructor. I don't want anyone to think that he was selfish, because I know when it first
Mm.
happened, probably that first month, all I kept thinking was like, how selfish of you. How could you do this? Like, why would you leave our children? And then the more I learned about mental health, the more I learned about, PTSD, depression, and suicide, he didn't know what he was doing. In his mind, his brain had 100% convinced him that we would be so much better off without him. And I know that he would never do that. I know 100% that he talked about and looked forward to his girls getting married. He joked and laughed about embarrassing them on the dance floor, and he couldn't wait to have grandchildren someday. If he wasn't suffering the way he was, he would have never took his own
Yeah.
life.
I think it's so easy in the moment because it is a grief process to have the anger where, how could you do this? You're selfish. And oftentimes, patients, like you said, they can't grasp even thinking about what's going to happen after the fact because they're so hyper focused on how they're feeling now and that feeling that it's not going to get any better. Was there a time where you noticed the obvious signs or the switch in his mood? Or do you think he was really good at masking and internalizing that?
So we didn't like talk on a daily basis, but the more I have talked to my children, because they pretty much talk to him almost every day, or they would meet him for dinner or have some sort of outing with him, they
Yeah.
feel like over time they've noticed the signs, and they knew that he had gotten to a point where he did isolate and he was getting bad and the pain was just overbearing. Like he isolated himself to like one room because it just hurt to walk. So they noticed some signs. And the last time I had saw him was actually 2 weeks prior. We were all at an outing at one of the volunteer fire departments for a pancake breakfast, and we sat and had breakfast together, and he was his normal self cracking jokes and like talking about the day and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I still have a hard time believing that it's true that he really went through with it because he was
Yeah.
always the fun guy. He was the happy guy. He was the life of the party. And now when I look back, it's like, was that just him trying to cover up his emotions or to make people think that he was okay?
I think I see that even more in people that work in medicine, especially EMS, police, fire, emergency medicine, because we get so good at compartmentalizing. And in a code, you can't break down in tears, you can't panic. We have to shut our emotions off and do what needs to be done. And that's
Mhm.
why I think it's so important. Because I know there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast from the area that work in EMS, fire, police, that this is the moment where we wish that they wouldn't compartmentalize their feelings because that's naturally what we do. That's how our EMS brain works.
Mhm.
And it it becomes very difficult because sometimes there are no signs. Sometimes there may be signs, but there's always that guilt after the fact that maybe we missed something. And a lot of times
Mhm.
there was nothing to miss. And so would you agree or would you say that he still was making plans for the future? He was going to these functions like you mentioned, hanging out with his daughters. Do you think this was something that could have even been prevented with the state that he was in and just how good he was at compartmentalizing?
I don't, and it's one thing that, like, my children, and I've even talked with my personal counselor and stuff like that, because 'cause I'm always like, "What if? What if I woulda called him? What if I woulda done this?" And one thing that she's taught me is I need to change that thinking of what if to even if, because even if we did these things, even if I said this, or even if I called him, this was still going to happen because he had hit that point where he just there for him, there was nothing that was gonna change it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're not mind readers. The loved ones are not mind readers. So anybody that's listening, it yes, we want to bring awareness to this, but we also are focusing on kind of after the fact. If someone has a loved one that has passed from suicide, creating those false what ifs are only hindering your healing. And
Mhm.
suicide is rarely caused by one person, one event. And in his case, I think that's very clear. Looking back, you mentioned that your daughters had kind of noticed some isolation. Had he ever made any comments to anyone? Because I want to emphasize in his case, it sounds like there really were very minimal signs. And so to people that are listening, can you recall anything that as you reflect, that triggered something in your mind? Or was he really just pretty quiet about it?
Um, so when we first went through our divorce, which would have been 10 years ago, um, he had made a few comments then that, well, there's just no use of living if we're not going to be together, kind of thing. And we all kind of just like brushed it off, as in people say that, kind of as a weapon or a tool. But a few years went by and we co-parented and we were very cordial. We still worked in the same county together. Like, we still got along. There was no animosity. There was no hatred or anything there. So in the beginning, yeah, he made a few comments, but it was nothing I felt that was real. And then when he got
Yeah.
hurt, he had made comments like, "I wish I would just fall and break my hip so they would fix it," or I wish I was just dead so I didn't have to have all this pain." But it was nothing that any of us took serious. And now that we look back,
Yeah.
maybe we should have. The last few years, really, he suffered in silence. He knew what he was going to do, and he kept it in, and he didn't want to tell anybody after he felt like the time he did reach out for help and was made fun of or ridiculed. I think after that, he 110% became silent, and nothing was going to change it at that point.
Yeah. I think too, part of being an EMS, having our dark humor, I can't count the number of times that I've jokingly said I'm going to go jump off the helipad because it's a stressful shift. That's what
Yep.
EMS people, that's how we
Mhm.
cope with things. But the majority of us have no intention. It's how we cope. And so
Yep.
even in those moments where you make those comments, you can't necessarily flag it as a warning sign sometimes.
Right.
And in his case, it really sounds like he didn't show any warning signs. And some of the common warning signs, just to educate those that are listening, they start isolating, they start withdrawing themselves. Maybe they're even starting to give their things away, things that they are very passionate about, their prized possessions. If they start to seem very, very calm and happy, and whereas before maybe they weren't, um, feeling hopeless, expressing that they're hopeless, doing things that are reckless, making choices that they would never usually make because they just don't see any value, in their life. Sleep changes, appetite changes, starting to say goodbye in these subtle ways. Sometimes there are warning signs, but it's so important to let families know after the fact that if they're not showing these signs, sometimes we don't know what to ask. We don't know how to approach these people because they're not giving those signs. And in his case, I think focusing on the difficult conversation. So it sounds like he was trying to avoid those difficult conversations because he had felt hurt and unheard before. What would you say now if you could, or what would you say to anyone listening when they have that fear of reaching out?
That one's hard because, especially with him also just being a man, that's also the pride that got in the way too.
Mm.
But
Uh-huh.
just there's always a reason. There's always something to look forward to. Just don't, if you feel like you were talking to one person and they didn't listen, find somebody else. There's always going to be somebody out there to listen. It doesn't matter if it's a complete stranger. There is going to be someone that will listen to you.
Yeah. And I think our friends and our family, it's kind of in their nature to, I don't know, maybe give a shit sometimes and joke and not take these things seriously. But there are professionals trained and passionate about helping people, whether it's
Mhm.
using the suicide hotline, texting 988, finding a local resource. I know just with Carl alone, we have so many resources in the Peoria area. There's always something out there. And so, yeah, I agree that it's important to emphasize those resources. I have often heard from family members or friends kind of after the fact, whether there was a suicide attempt or if someone did pass, that they didn't want to ask them directly, are you feeling suicidal? Do you want to hurt yourself? Because they were worried that it was going to plant the idea in their head. But in your ex husband's case, from what you've said, you feel like his mind, he was already there. And so
Oh, yeah.
had you had any indicator, had you had any thought that maybe that was happening, what what kind of conversations do you wish we could normalize in talking about that? How do you feel like we could approach that in someone else?
Probably just approaching it as in, and it's funny that you asked that. So my daughter actually used to do this with him. And she every day
Okay.
she would come home and she would say, "All right, dad, what's your highs and your lows of the day?" And he'd be like, "Oh man,
Okay.
again?" You know? And she'd be like, "No,
Yep.
really, what's your highs and lows?" And he'd be like, "I don't want to talk about that shit," and stuff like that. And she's just like, "Come on, just give me your highs and lows." And
Mhm.
it became this thing between them. And it was just a pattern. And so he would say the good things, and then he would say the bad things. And that's how she knew, or she could communicate with him to figure out what was going on, to see what his thoughts were. And I think that's a great way, like with anybody. What's your high today? What's your low today? And it's funny
Yeah.
because I know that they actually do that in schools with kids.
I think that's a great way to get people to open up, but sometimes it's not directly asking a patient or a family member or a friend, "Are you depressed? Is something going on? Like what you're acting weird. What's going on? Fill me in. Do you want to kill yourself?" And so then the families and friends are like, "I don't know how to bring this up. What am I supposed to do?" Sometimes it's just saying, "I'm here. I'm here. Hey, I'm here if you want to
Mhm.
talk. I'm here if anything's on your mind. Tell me about your highs and lows today. How was your day?" And if they're just saying, "Good," maybe being persistent. But even in those cases, there's going to be scenarios where there's not any indicators, and the patient themselves or the individual themselves has to offer that information for us to know. And so I want to focus on kind of removing the guilt and removing the shame from families kind of after the fact.
Mhm.
How long do you think how long do you think it took after he passed away to stop blaming yourself? Or have you stopped blaming yourself? And have your daughters stopped blaming themselves?
I I don't think any of us have stopped blaming ourselves yet. I still
Yeah.
I still carry the guilt of, did I fail him as a wife, an ex-wife? Did I fail him as the mother of his children? And then I think, did I fail my kids as their mom and protector? Because if I would have just seen things or did things differently, would their dad still be here? So those are things that I probably will carry for quite some time. I know my kids carry a little bit of guilt of, my middle daughter had moved away um, prior to him passing away. And that was one of her biggest fears. And she had said that, I'm afraid if I move out of town, and she only moved an hour away. And she's like, I'm afraid that
Yeah.
dad's going to do something. And then so within a year later, and it happens, like she does carry that guilt. And then my other daughter, she's like, I hadn't talked to him in a week, with our work schedules and stuff. So she carries that guilt of it, 5 to 7 days before since the last time she had talked to her dad. Um, so we
Yeah.
all have a little bit of some sort of guilt that we're carrying around, but I try to look at it and I tell my kids that that's just how much we loved them, that we're not
Yeah.
ready to let go of
Yeah.
that guilt.
That's a common theme where the survivors of this kind of become the investigators of what did we do wrong? How can we fix this? And especially when you work in healthcare like you do, you're a fixer. You want to fix a
Hmm.
problem. And in these scenarios, that could look like rereading old texts or kind of obsessing over the last conversation or not reaching out, for 5 days. And that guilt can can last, and it's very understandable. Was there a time pretty much immediately after? Is there something that you wish someone had told you in that moment to kind of help with your healing process? Is there something that you needed to hear at that time?
Um, so the day that it happened, it was a bad experience. So reading his note that he left, he had actually attempted the night before by taking medication. It didn't work. He
Oh,
woke up the next morning. So he was still determined to carry out the plan. Well, it was my day off of work.
yeah.
I was out running errands, and I had actually gotten a text from one of my good friends who's a provider in one of the local ERs and said, please tell me it's not true. And I'm like, question mark, what's not true? And she said that Roger shot himself. I said, my ex-husband, Roger? And she said, yeah. And so I immediately called my youngest daughter and I said, you need to locate dad's phone, find out what's going on. And she's like, what's going on, mom? And I said, I was told that he possibly shot himself. I don't know if it's true. And so she tried to locate his phone and it connected to the public safety building. And so instantly she called there and the detective said, yes, he shot himself, but he was talking at the scene. They took him over to Carl. So instantly, I called my son. I didn't call my other daughter in the moment because she was in her first week of clinicals. Anyone knows nursing school? We know that really can't miss clinicals or
Mhm.
you fail nursing. So I wanted to
Yeah.
wait until I knew for sure any information that I knew before I called her to pull her out. So we were heading over
Yeah.
to Carl, and when we got there, I had seen 2 people that I knew who I'd worked with previously, and had said, "Is Roger here?" And they had said, "They didn't call you?" And I said, "No, nobody's called me. I don't know anything what's going on." And they're like, "Well, we'll get somebody to talk to you." And they put me out in the waiting room with my daughter, and some time
Um,
went by, still nobody was communicating. So I walked back over. I said, "Can somebody please give us an update?" And they're like, the security guard's like, "We have somebody coming to talk to you." Well, at that time, I had a phone call from Carl, and it was the trauma surgeon. And he said,
mm,
he asked me my name, my relationship. And I said, "I'm actually downstairs. Can somebody please come talk to us?" And he said, "I'll be right down." And at that point, my other children were there, and
yeah.
he come down and talked to me with, I think it was case management. I'm not sure who it was. And I said, "Well, can I get my daughters? They're technically the next of kin. I'm not." And he said, "No, I want to talk to you first." And he explained to me that yes, he was talking, because where he went out to one of his local fishing spots in one of our parks, and shot himself in the chest. And he someone was out there, and they called 911. And obviously laying there, the wound, it must have clotted off until they started
Yeah.
moving him around and everything. But he was talking at the scene, "Just leave me be, let me die. I don't, leave me alone." And um, so EMS
Yeah.
took him over to Carl, but the trauma surgeon had said that yes, he may have been talking when he came in, but he wasn't alert and talking. He knew his first name, but he couldn't say anything else. And he had said when they
Yeah.
had got him into surgery, he had he had said that the wound that he had, he cannot believe that he made it from the scene to the hospital. He said people usually instantly die from this wound. And he said, and the more I kept trying
Yeah.
to repair the heart and suture and stitches, like he just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding, which makes me wonder if it's from the
Yeah.
medication he took the night before, trying to commit suicide the night
Yeah.
before. And then
Yeah.
just the way everything was handled afterwards, like there was no communication, no nurse came and talked to us. Like we didn't know the time of death for 2 days. I knew, being an ER nurse, that it would be a coroner's case. I knew he would have to go for an autopsy. But when Gift of Hope called me that night of his passing, we had agreed, yes, we want him to be a donor and everything of what he could. We had no clue that they even removed him from the hospital and took him to Springfield. We had no clue for 2 days where his body was. Like there was no communication. So the whole process in that first 48 hours was just devastating. Not only for the fact that we lost him, but nobody was telling us anything. Nobody was communicating with us. So in our minds, we're like, what is going
Yeah.
on? What happened? Can somebody please just give us an answer? And then that's when we found out there was a note left. And so that gave us a little bit of answers, but just the way it was all handled, it was just heartbreaking and soul
Yeah.
crushing. And yeah, it was a lot. So
Yeah.
probably right afterwards, if the first thing that anybody could have told us was this is when he passed away, because here to come to find out, he literally passed away in surgery 10 minutes before we walked through the door. If somebody would have just reached out to
Ah,
us when, I mean, because they knew that I was his emergency contact in the ER when they rolled him in. When EMS brought him in, they knew I was his emergency contact. Why didn't they call us then? Why didn't the detectives
yeah.
who were out at the park and saw the letter to call us, why didn't they call us then? Maybe we could have got there. Maybe we could have saw him or said goodbye. So it's, again, it's those
Yeah.
what ifs that are just, it's hard not to
Yeah.
think about them. Mhm.
But especially in that moment where there's already so many unknowns, you don't know what's going on, you didn't know what was going through his head. Having that communication and support from the healthcare team absolutely would make sense. And were they saying anything, or did anyone after he passed, whether it be friends, family, medical staff, was there anything that was said that you're like, why would you say that? What should you not say to the survivors? Was there anything that you can remember that just had you thinking, like, how could you say that to somebody?
Um, nothing that I can think of. The only really bad thing was pastoral care before we left the hospital. Brought I had said, "Is there anything we need to sign before we leave or any of his belongings and we need to take?" And she literally brought us the brown evidence bag that we all know what's in it. And it was covered in blood, and it had his cut up sweatshirt, and it had his Under Armour slide shoe in there. And I said, "Are you sure you're supposed to be giving this to us?" And she said, "Well, that's what I just grabbed off the counter." And I was like, "Okay, at that point, we're leaving. I'm done communicating with, like, that was
Yeah.
the worst. That was the worst thing you could have ever handed over to my children." And so that's
Yeah.
probably the one thing that I would pray never happens to another family member.
Yeah. I think dealing with that in the moment, it takes grace and peace and empathy. And it sounds like you were not given those things in
None.
that moment by
Nothing,
really
nothing.
anyone. And that is, I think in the future, and if there's ever another scenario, which of course we want to prevent these things, but it's going to happen. We're going to
Mhm.
see, these cases, unfortunately. And this goes for the survivors, the families, the friends after the fact too. Just letting them know, like, hey, we're here for you. How can we help you? You don't have to carry this alone. Is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable? Can we answer any questions? Like, this was not your fault. But in the moment, in your case, it seems very transactional almost. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To the point where it was really hard to come back to work since me and two of my children all work for this organization. And so we had actually met with the ER director and the trauma director. And I was like, something needs to be better in the future. No family should ever go through
Yeah.
what we went through, and there needs to be a process. And it's just like when we do the debriefing after codes and stuff like that. Like, I had told the ER director, I'm like, there needs to be not so much a handbook for staff and how to handle family and things that tragically go wrong. Like, there just needs to be some sort of better process for people to follow, because
Mhm.
100% we were failed, he was failed. And I truly, as a nurse and, like you said, a fixer, I don't ever, ever want anyone to ever go through those kinds of emotions like we did.
We have advocates and counselors for drug and alcohol abuse survivors. We have them for sexual assault survivors. We have
Mhm.
people that come in and these resources that are set up for all these different patients. But where are the advocates for the survivors of suicide, whether it be the patient or if a patient does pass? Somebody that is trained in talking with them. So, are there any resources now after the fact? Have they tried to advocate for any kind of change, or is that still something that you think can be worked on?
Oh, I think they could definitely still improve on it. And I know anything that when you want to introduce something new, and it includes making policy or protocol changes, or and you're including higher ups or marketing or anything like that, I know it takes time. But I mean, here we are, it's been a year later, and they were supposed to follow up with us and never did. And so for, like, me and my children, we're just taking it day by day and advocating any possible way we can. We're constantly sharing stuff about suicide awareness. They made a scholarship for their dad to make sure to remember him. We know that there has to be better resources for people who suffer from mental health. There just is not as much out there. And mental health needs to be recognized as a disease just like everything else.
Absolutely. Maybe there does need to be an emergency medicine advocate or a crisis advocate for families, for the survivors after suicide, because I've working in the ER, I've seen people are uncomfortable. They don't know how to talk to you. They don't know how to deal with it. And I've had, gosh, a pastoral care told a family member one time, well, at least they're at peace.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
who
the worst thing.
saying you think you're helping, or where it's like, well, everything happens for a reason. Are you serious? Like, those are
Yeah.
some of the worst things you can say to someone in that moment. And it's like, yeah, maybe they think they're helping, but we need we need people that are trained in this. And again, the goal is prevention. And I think it's great that you are using this in the best way you can to advocate for mental health and suicide awareness, especially mental health and in healthcare workers, and with the scholarship. But sometimes it is going to happen. And we also have to advocate for the families and the friends after the fact, because if if you weren't able to cope and you weren't able to heal and your children didn't have the resources they need, we could always be looking at another statistic. And we absolutely do not want to leave those families and friends with that burden either. Do you think that there has been strides in the community since then? Do you think that people that knew your ex-husband are more aware, or do you think that we've still got a lot of work to do in that not just in that community, but in general?
I I would honestly say I think we still have a lot of work to do. I mean, obviously everyone showed up in those first few weeks after and his funeral and
Yeah.
everything. It was amazing to see the support and everything, but I think it was very forgotten quickly.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I hate
Yeah.
to say that, but people go about their lives, which is understandable. Um, but
Right.
it's hard for me to see my kids still struggle with it and go through it when these people said, "We'll be there for you, we'll show up for you." And here we are a year later, and maybe one or two have reached out to them. Even some people who
Yeah.
were really close to him don't really have anything to do with my kids now. And I'm just like, shame on you, and
Right.
I think that's my defense mechanism or my wall that I've built up from working in healthcare is I can have that stance. I can be firm but supportive, and I know when I need to be there for my kids. And it's just something that I've learned over time. Even if I'm hurting, that all goes aside because my kids come first.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think as families heal, it's getting rid of those what ifs and focusing on how you can use the situation we're given for the better. Absolutely, we wish that that had never been the result, but I think you guys are doing so much good for the community, and the fact that you are trying to raise awareness and using his death to prevent, a future death. As we wrap up, what do you hope people take away from this conversation today?
Just to check in with people, even if it's somebody that you don't normally talk to every day. If you notice something just even mildly off with them, just check in with them. You don't even have to say, "Are you all right? Is everything okay?" Just say, "Hey, I just wanted to say hi," because that's going to make that person be like, "Oh, someone thought of me today." And
Mhm.
I think the more that people realize that people do care about them or think about them more frequently than what their brain is telling them, it might just be a
Mhm.
slim chance of hope for these people.
Yeah. And I think too, you made it a great point, is sometimes prevention is just one text message. One
Hmm.
text message, "Hey, how's it going? Hey, you want to get coffee sometime soon?" Like, it could be one text, it could be one honest conversation, one check-in. And so while we may not be able to prevent everything, reaching out and being there for people is so important. Um, so I really do appreciate your willingness to come on and talk today,
Yes.
especially during this month. We're trying really hard to continue advocating. Is there anything that you would like people to know?
Um, I just think what you said, I think that would be amazing if we could get some advocates for our mental health patients or our suicidal patients. Because the one thing that we did find out about him, he did regret doing it, you know. And when he was talking, he's like, "My kid," he made the comment, "My kids are going to kick my ass," you know. So, like, that feels good knowing that he
Yeah.
regretted it and did want to be here with us. So I think just having the advocates for the people is hopefully going to make a change for families and friends.
Yeah. And we have that cliche out there where it's like, don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But
Mhm.
in the moment, when your mind is in such a place, you don't see it as a temporary problem. You see that as your permanent fate. And patients that have survived attempts most of the time do have those regrets. And it's one of those things that if we can prevent it, we'll do everything we can. If we can't, please let me know if there's anything that I can do in the future, any mental health awareness activities that you have going on. Do you guys, with the scholarship, is there like a foundation where people can donate? Do you just kind of direct people
We just
somewhere in
direct
general?
people, just because they have us set up at the bank in Catlin, and it's just Roger Lang Memorial account. And then what the
Yeah.
scholarship's going towards is a student in Vermilion County who actually wants to go into EMS or fire. So they're doing $1,000 scholarship
Okay.
each year because that will actually pay for one student's whole entire EMT basic class.
It's easy to talk about suicide prevention and what we would want to do and how we would want to do it. But my hope is that hearing a story that is tangible, that we hear from the survivors, we hear from the families, that it is going to drive people to want to learn how to reach out and check on people. And prevention is not always medication, prevention is not always hospitalization, because as that story showed, we didn't have the knowledge that this patient needed the help. And so sometimes prevention is just reducing the shame around mental health, reducing the shame around feeling depressed or feeling suicidal. Sometimes it is just showing that you're present for someone, showing that you're there for them, sending them a text message, checking in and seeing if they want to go for a walk or grab a coffee, and just letting them know that they are loved and wanted and needed in life. Sometimes suicide prevention is access to care, having more access to psychiatry and psychology, and having that sense of community and belonging. So sometimes prevention is unattainable because there are going to be patients that don't show signs, that don't reach out. And our goal in those moments is just showing people love and compassion and breaking the stigma around mental health. So, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I know that it can be a very difficult topic to talk about, but it's one that we need to talk about. So, we will see everybody next week. Bye.